I want to bring Congressman Paul, Senator Santorum into this. But let's take this question from Miami. CNN en Español's Juan Carlos Lopez has a guest there.
Hola, Wolf. We're at the viewing party for the Hispanic Leadership Network, and it really is a party. They're holding their yearly conference, a meeting of Hispanic Republican leaders. And I'm joined by Raquel Rodriguez. She's an attorney in Miami. She practices business and international law, and she has a question for the candidates.
Yes, good evening. The U.S. has been largely away in its foreign and trade policy with Latin America. In the meantime, Iran and China have been increasing their influence over and involvement in Latin America through the leftist and left-leaning governments. What would each of you do as president to more deeply engage in Latin America and, importantly, to support the governments and the political parties that support democracy and free markets?
Congressman Paul.
Well, I think free trade is the answer. Free trade is an answer to a lot of conflicts around the world, so I'm always promoting free trade. And you might add Cuba, too. I think we'd be a lot better off with Cuba, trading with Cuba. So I think the more you can do to promote this free trade, the better off we'll be. But as far as us having an obligation, a military or a financial obligation to go down and dictate to them what government they should have, I don't like that idea. I would work with the people, encourage free trade, and try to set a standard here where countries in Central America or South America or any place in the world would want to emulate us and set the standards that we have. Unfortunately, sometimes we slip up on our standards and we go around the world and we try to force ourselves on others. I don't think the nations in South America and Central America necessarily want us to come down there and dictate which government they should have. And yet I believe with friendship and trade you can have a lot of influence, and I strongly believe that it's time we have friendship and trade with Cuba.
Senator Santorum, are you with Congressman Paul?
No, I'm not with Congressman Paul, and I'm not with Barack Obama on this issue. Our policy in Central and South America under this administration has been abysmal. The way we have treated, in particular, countries like Honduras. Honduras was stood up for the rule of law, which threw out a would-be dictator who was using the Chavez playbook from Venezuela in order to try to run for re-election in Honduras. And the United States government, instead of standing behind the pro-democracy, the people in the parliament, the people in the Supreme Court who tried to enforce the Constitution of Honduras, instead of siding with them, the Democrats, President Obama sided with two other people in South America, Central America and South America, Chavez and Castro and Obama, sided against the people of Honduras. This is a consistent policy of siding with the leftists, siding with the Marxists, siding with those who don't support democracy, not standing up for our friends in Colombia, not standing up for our friends who want to engage and support America, who want to be great trading partners and great allies for our country, to be able to form that kind of bond that is so essential in our own hemisphere. The European Union understood how important it was for diverse people to be able to come together in an economic unit. We not only have to come together as an economic unit, but the threat of terrorism, the threat of Iran now in Venezuela and in other places, in Cuba and in Nicaragua, the threat of radical Islam growing in that region, it's absolutely important for us to have a president who understands that threat and understands the solution is closer ties. I will visit that area of the world repeatedly to solidify those ties when I become president.
Let me let Congressman Paul quickly respond.
The senator mentions standing up for some of these nations, but he doesn't define it. But standing up for nations like this usually means that we impose ourselves, go and pick the dictators, undermine certain governments, also sending them a lot of money. It doesn't work. Most of the time this backfires. They resent us. We can achieve what he wants in a much different way than us using the bully attitude that you will do it our way. This is not a benefit to us. And besides, where are you going to get the troops and where are you going to get the money? Because you're talking about force. And I know of a much better way than using force to get along with people.
I don't know what answer Congressman Paul was listening to. He obviously wasn't listening to my answer. What I talked about is building strong economic relationships, strong national security relationships. No one's talking about force. No one's talking about going into Cuba or going into Venezuela. It's talking about the other countries in the region which are being influenced greatly by those countries that are tending and moving toward those militant socialists instead of the United States. Why? Because we've ignored them. You had a president of the United States that held a Colombian free trade agreement. Colombia, who's out there in the front lines working with us against the narco-terrorists, standing up to Chavez in South America. And what did we do? For domestic political purposes, the President of the United States sided with organized labor and the environmental groups and held Colombia hanging out to dry for 3 years. We cannot do that to our friends in South America.
We're gonna come back to this. We're gonna come back to Cuba as well. But stand by for that. We did double check just now, Governor, that ad that we talked about where I quoted you as saying that Speaker Gingrich called Spanish the language of the ghetto. We just double checked. It was one of your ads. It's running here in Florida on the radio. And at the end you say, I'm Mitt Romney and I approved this ad. So it is here.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask the Speaker a question. Did you say what the ad says or not? I don't know.
It's taken totally out of context.
Oh, okay.
I did not know. I did not say it about Spanish. I said in general, about all languages. We are better for children to learn English in general, period.
Let's take a look at what he said.
All right, we have a very important subject, housing, not only here in Florida, foreclosures, really, really bad, but all over the country. And a lot of people are wondering if the federal government contributed to the housing collapse in recent years. So we got a question that came into us, let me put it up there and I'll read it to you. How would you phase out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? Does the private mortgage industry need additional regulation? That from William Schmidt. Let me start with Governor Romney.
Well, I think you know that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were a big part of why we have the housing crisis in the nation that we have. And we've had this discussion before. Speaker Gingrich was hired by Freddie Mac to promote them, to influence other people throughout Washington, encouraging them to not to dismantle these two entities. I think that was an enormous mistake. I think instead we should have had a whistleblower and not a horn tooter. He should have stood up and said, look, these things are a disaster. This is a crisis. He should have been anxiously telling the American people that these entities were causing a housing bubble that would cause a collapse that we've seen here in Florida and around the country. And are they a problem today? Absolutely. They're offering mortgages, again, to people who can't possibly repay them. We're creating another housing bubble, which will hurt the American people. The right course for our housing industry is to get people back to work so they can buy homes again. We have 9.9% unemployment in Florida. It's unthinkable. 18% real unemployment here. Get people back to work. We'll get people into homes, get the foreclosures out of the system, let people get into homes, rent properties if necessary, and get America's housing industry growing again.
Speaker Gingrich.
Let me start by saying Florida is one of the 2 or 3 most hard-hit states on foreclosures. How many of you know somebody who's had a house foreclosed? Just raise your hand. Raise your hand. Okay. The governor has cheerfully been attacking me inaccurately, and he knows it. The contracts we released from Freddie Mac said I would do no consulting. Wrote in, no lobbying, none. But there's a more interesting story. We began digging in after Monday night because, frankly, I'd had about enough of this. We discovered, to our shock, Governor Romney owns shares of both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Governor Romney made $1 million off of selling some of that. Governor Romney owns share and has an investment in Goldman Sachs, which is today foreclosing on Floridians. So maybe Governor Romney, in the spirit of openness, should tell us how much money he's made off of how many households that have been foreclosed by his investments. But let's be clear about that.
This is fun. First of all, my investments are not made by me. My investments for the last 10 years have been in a blind trust, managed by a trustee. Secondly, the investments that they made, we've learned about this as we made our financial disclosure, have been in mutual funds and bonds. I don't own stock in either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. There are bonds that the investor has held through mutual funds. And Mr. Speaker, I know that sounds like an enormous revelation, but have you checked your own investments? You also have investments through mutual funds that also invest in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Right.
Let me finish. I've got more time. Let me just continue. There's a big difference between buying like U.S. savings bonds and getting a return. That's not taking money out of the United States. That's loaning money to the United States. And what my trustee did is he loaned money to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And they got paid interest, of course, just like if you buy U.S. savings bonds. But what the Speaker did was to work as a spokesman to promote Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to protect them from those people that wanted to take them down. He got paid $1.6 million to do that. He said his first contract indicated there'd be no lobbying. But his second contract didn't have that prescription taken out of it. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that? What he was doing was clearly promoting Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, in this case Freddie Mac, to the tune of $1.6 million. That is one of the reasons we're in the trouble we're in.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, you'll notice that the governor wasn't aware of the ad he was running. He's not aware of the investments that were being made in his name.
Of course I can't. That's a blind trust.
And to compare my investments with his is like comparing a tiny mouse with a giant elephant. The fact is that there is a very substantial question. You didn't give any instructions to say, gee, let's not do this or let's not do that. You're very quick to draw the widest possible exaggeration. The fact is, the only time I ever spoke to the Congress about this issue was in July of 2008. The New York Times reported it. I told the Republicans in the House, vote no, do not give them any money. They need to be reformed. And in answer to the question earlier, I would break each of them up into 5 or 6 separate units, and over a 5-year period, I would wean them from all federal sponsorship, because we need to get away from those gigantic systems.
Let me bring Congressman Paul, then Senator Santorum. Quick follow-up question to you, but specifically, it seems that they both acknowledge they both made money from Fannie and Freddie. Should they return that money?
That subject really doesn't interest me a whole lot. But the question does. The question is, what are we going to do about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? It should have been auctioned off right after the crash came. It would have been cleansed by now. It should have been sold. But maybe it's my physician background, but I think an ounce of prevention is what we ought to talk about, so we quit doing this. But we know how the bubble came about. It was excessive credit, interest rates held too low, too long, the Federal Reserve responsible for that. Community Reinvestment Act, which is affirmative action telling banks they have to make these risky loans. At the same time, there was a line of credit which allowed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to, to make more money. And it was assumed that they would always be protected. Now, you can't argue. I've talked a long time about cutting off that credit from the Fed. I was trying to prevent this stuff. Also, I oppose Community Reinvestment Act, as well as I had legislation in 10 years before the bust came to remove that line of credit to the Fed, to the Treasury. So,
Senator Santorum?
Well, I would just say in answer to the question that, as I mentioned last debate, in 2006, I went out and authored a letter with 24 other senators asking for major reform of Freddie and Fannie, warning of a meltdown and a bubble in the housing market. I stood out, I stood tall, and tried to get a reform, and we couldn't do it. The reform we need is to gradually decrease the amount of mortgage that it can be financed by Freddie or underwritten by Freddie and Fannie over time. Keep reducing that until we get rid of Fannie and Freddie. The bigger issue here is these two gentlemen who are out distracting from the most important issues we have by playing petty personal politics. Can we set aside that Newt was a member of Congress and used the skills that he developed as a member of Congress to go out and advise companies, and that's not the worst thing in the world, and that Mitt Romney is a wealthy guy because he worked hard and he's going out and working hard, and you should guys leave that alone and focus on the issue.
We're going to take a quick break, but we have a lot more to discuss. Coming up, the debate questions go to space, the final frontier. Stay with us.